Please join me in welcoming our own member, Diane Freeman, as she plays the Native American flute for us. You can read more information about Diane in your order of service. Also, this first song that she is going to play for us, Tears for Kiantapoose, has a backstory that is really interesting. Kiantapoose was a Modoc Indian, chief of his tribe, and the United States government was trying to move the Modoc people off of their tribal lands. The Modoc people were not happy about that and started to fight. They were really, it was dragging on for quite some time. People were losing their lives. Kiantapoose wanted peace more than anything, and he hid his warriors so that there would be no more fighting. The warriors were not happy about this because they were warriors, and they kind of bullied Kiantapoose, and they called him a woman and coward and a lot of other things. Kiantapoose, they went back and they started fighting again, and Kiantapoose was captured and lost his life. Mary Youngblood is the author of this song, and she wrote it, Tears for Kiantapoose. Diane? That was beautiful and so mournful. I could feel the tears through the music. Our opening words today are titled The Cure at Troy by Seamus Heaney. Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right the wrong that has been inflicted or endured. The innocent in jails beat upon their bars together. A hunger striker's father stands in the graveyard, dumb. The police widow in veils faints at the funeral home. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. Call the miracle self-healing, the utter self-revealing double take of feeling. If there's a fire on the mountain or lightning and a storm and a God speaks from the sky, that means someone is hearing the outcry and the birth cry of a new life at its term. It means that once in a lifetime, justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. I invite you to please rise in body or spirit and join our song leaders to sing our opening hymn, number 34, in the gray hymnal, Though I Speak with Bravest Fire. Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Donna Zimmerman, and I will be your worship leader this morning. Well, we have entered the season where the weather can't make up its mind, what we call wrap and peel days. You wrap up warmly in the morning, and then you peel off the extra layers in the afternoon. But there is no doubt that no matter how many layers we have on right now, it's good to be here today. If you are new to this church or our faith, you will find that Unitarian Universalists journey down many different paths to discover our individual truths and find purpose and meaning in our lives. As a faith, we do not have a mandated creed that we all must adhere to. Rather, we have a shared belief in the values of our denomination. You will find them in your order of service. We live those values in all the ways we pursue our own spiritual growth and maturity. We are proud of and grateful for our religious pluralism. No matter where we are on our own faith journey of development, we strive to live our faith through what we do, not what we say we believe. I want to offer a special welcome to any first-time or returning guests who are here. We are glad you have chosen to be with us today, and a perfect time to get to know us is to join us for refreshments and conversation at the end of the service. In the back, and there'll be pass-through windows with refreshments and coffee and other good things. Also, be sure to stop by our welcome table at the entryway and pick up some information about our church and our denomination. If you haven't already done so, you're invited to sign in as a guest and get a name tag so that we can call you by your name. Feel free to ask any member questions you may have, and they will be happy to answer you or get you connected with someone who can. We offer regular Learn About Us classes if you're interested in finding out more about our church and our denomination, or if you're at the point of wanting to join our church, check with a volunteer sitting at the welcome table for information. Now, will you please ensure that your electronic devices are turned off, and we will enter into this sacred time together. Members of our church, BBUUC, have come together to develop our commitment to each other and how we choose to be in relationship together. We recite this every Sunday to affirm again this covenantal relationship, these promises that we make to each other. Please remain seated and join me in reciting our Congregational covenant, which is printed in your order of service. We covenant to engage with one another with honesty, kindness, and respect, to value diversity, seek understanding of our differences, and practice gracious accountability with care, love, and empathy. We make these promises to those who are here and those yet to come, so that we may be a safe, welcoming, and beloved community of acceptance, learning, and transformation. Now, if you will please rise in body or spirit and join in singing our call to worship, which is also printed in your order of service. We light our chalice each Sunday morning as a symbol of our faith. I invite Ron Furster to please come forward and light the chalice as you listen to the words of Reverend Scott Taylor. May this flame cast its light towards better days, reminding us that the future is not simply a place we are going, but a place we are creating. Thank you, Alyssa. The path of new possibilities will not be found, but made. The justice we long for does not sit at the end of the inevitable arc. It lies in the bending. That is also ours to do. Oh, God, Donna. Let's start this over. May this flame cast its light toward better days. There we go. The future is not simply a place we are going, but a place we are creating. The path of new possibilities will not be found, but made. The justice we long for does not sit at the end of that inevitable arc. It lies in the bending. That is ours to do. A new world is waiting to be built, friends. May our time together light the way. Thank both of you. Thank you, Diane. Our church is self-supporting through the generosity of our members and friends. Indeed, we are a spiritual community. However, we know we live in a real and rational world. We are mindful of being good stewards of your donations. We are grateful for your ongoing pledge support to fund our programs and ministries, pay our staff, take care of the necessary expenses that ensure the comfort and the beauty of our buildings and grounds. We offer you many ways to give, including clicking on the link on the homepage of our website, setting up a bank draft, scanning the QR code in your order of service, and also dropping it in the collection plate. Yes, we do pass the plate. While we are very modern with QR codes and websites and everything, we also are traditional in passing the plate because this is an act of community that pulls us all together. We touch and we pass the plate to our neighbor. No matter which method you choose, please participate in this ritual by taking the plate and passing it to your neighbor or the row behind you. Patty DiStefano and Chuck Smithers will now come forward to assist with the offering. This reading is called My Life as Protest by Thomas Merton. It is my intention to make my entire life a rejection of, a protest against the crimes and injustices of war and political tyranny which threaten to destroy the whole human race and the world. By my life and vows, I am saying no to the concentration camps, the aerial bombardments, the staged political trials, the judicial murders, the racial injustices, the economic tyrannies, and the whole socio-economic apparatus, which seems geared for nothing but global destruction in spite of all of its fair words in favor of peace. I make a silent protest against the lies of politicians, propagandists, agitators when I speak. It is to deny that my faith and my church can ever be seriously aligned with the forces of injustice and destruction. My life, then, must be a protest against those who invoke their faith in support of war, racial injustice, and tyranny. If I say no to all these secular forces, I also say yes to all that is good in the world and in humanity. I say yes to all that is beautiful in nature. I say yes to all the men and women who are my brothers and sisters in the world. Elizabeth DeCoux is a member of our worship team, and I mentioned earlier our pastoral care team as an animal care chaplain. She will be giving voice to a sermon written by Reverend Gretchen Haley. Elizabeth, this pulpit is yours.
Thank you, Donna. Good morning. As Donna said, the sermon I'll be reading today was written by Reverend Gretchen Haley. She talks about going on a retreat where she was required to observe silence. She shares the spiritual insights she gained from that experience. Reverend Haley begins. 7 years ago, I wasn't quite as attached to my iPhone as I am now, but it was still a stretch to imagine 5 days without it, and in fact, without any form of connection to the outside world. I was headed to a Jesuit monastery, which is not the same sort where Thomas Merton, whose words Donna just read, spent nearly 30 years of his life. Merton was a Trappist monk, also known as a Cistercian monk. Some practices of the Jesuits, whose monastery I was headed to, differ meaningfully from Trappist practices. One of those differences relates to silence. The Ignatius House in Atlanta, Georgia, where I was headed, has a regular practice of total mandatory silence. Not only would I not have my phone or my television or my streaming Netflix, but I would not have any other voices at all. Instead, I would have only my own voice in my own head, my own thoughts, my own self. Basically, it would be torture. However, this torture was a requirement of the generous fellowship I had recently received, and so I packed and headed off to what the prophet Elijah and Paul Simon would call the sound of silence, which in my experience, ironically, is quite loud. The silence doesn't start right away, of course. They have to check you in, help you find your room, show you where the dining hall is, give you a tour of the grounds. After all this, I began to think maybe the website was wrong or just overstated. They all seem pretty normal and chatty. But then they review the schedule, and there it is in black and white, 7 p.m., silence until 9 the next morning. It was summertime, so it's not like 7 p.m. as we all know it right now. It was more like high noon with a still high Atlanta sun glaring down as if to say, deal with yourself once and for all. I had a twin bed, no roommate. There would be no cheating. Dinner came and went, and 7 o'clock hit. I tried not to panic. I took a walk around the campus, rivers and green trees, stones along the path which had been the stations of the cross before weather and time changed them. My body was hot and uncomfortable, unaccustomed as it was to the humidity. I sat on a bench and let the moment sink in, and all the moments leading up to that moment, the ones I hadn't had time to take in or space. How did I get here? Not just this bench, this silence, but more here, this life, this body, this person. Since starting seminary 2 years earlier, I was the parent to 2 children rather than just one. I'd spent much of the past year terrified my son would be returned to his birth mom. But the adoption was finalized and we were fine. We were fine. My partner and I had recently started talking seriously about what it would mean for me to be a minister in a church, and she a minister's wife. I was going to be a minister in a church. I prayed my partner wouldn't leave me. So much had happened, so much had changed. I wasn't the same person I had been even a year before. There were frogs, flowing water, and the rustle of the leaves with the occasional life-saving breeze. The rush from one minute to the next came to a glorious pause, and without the noise of schedules or the distraction of entertainment, in the terrible, terrifying, tremendous silence, I felt myself ready, whole, and alive. I felt fully aware of who I was called to be, and for whom. I enjoyed the subtle victory of knowing myself. Queer, feminist, mom to 2 beautiful children, Unitarian Universalist minister-to-be, and former Catholic, all while sitting on a stone bench in Atlanta, Georgia, observing monastic silence. I thought of Audre Lorde's bittersweet acknowledgement of what it really means to live outside society's expectations. In Lorde's words, those of us who live that way were never meant to survive. In that quiet moment, I felt my life was, as much as any march I'd ever gone on, any letter I'd ever written, any sermon I'd ever preached, as much as any of these, my life right there and then was a protest. Like Thomas Merton says, a rejection of all the forces which threaten to destroy the human race and the world. That my very existence was a statement of resistance against every injustice, and in turn, a powerful yes to all that is good in the world. It is important for me to start here in the silence for this sermon on resistance, because too often we go immediately to the most politically charged and publicly visible examples of witness or activism when we think about this word resistance. We think of the solo heroes who capture the news with their public acts. Malala Yousafzai or Bree Newsom, Cesar Chavez, Martin Luther King Jr., Joan of Arc. Starting in the silence reminds us that sometimes the most critical protest begins at home, with a resistance to our usual patterns, a resistance to the rush, to the noise. It begins with sitting down with our own selves, looking into our own hearts, remembering who we are, collecting ourselves, who we hope to be and for whom, taking stock, giving thanks, believing we are already enough, and having eyes to see the miracle of life already unfolding. As Unitarian Universalist blogger Mech Groot says it, social change is an inside job. Let us step back for a moment to clarify this term, resistance. Robin Myers, in his book, Spiritual Defiance, Building a Beloved Community of Resistance, defines resistance as a form of direct or indirect action opposing anything in the dominant culture that brings death and indignity to any member of the human family or to creation itself. Critical to that is the word action. Resistance for our purposes is not ideological, analytical, or theoretical. It's embodied in action that either directly or indirectly opposes those things that bring death or indignity. Unitarian Universalist theologian Rebecca Parker, whom I will mention a few times this morning, advocates for UU congregations to act primarily as communities of resistance, what she describes as countercultural habitations in which people learn ways to survive and thrive that can resist and sometimes even transform an unjust, dominant culture. She envisions everything we do, from worship to religious education to service, as tools and practices for resisting injustice. She calls it a counter-education system, a phrase that calls to mind texts like Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States or Ronald Takaki's History of Multicultural America. These also true versions of our history that have been left out of the approved textbooks most of us were raised on. Counter-education in congregational life teaches us new practices and habits. For example, to affirm that every person is inherently worthy. In counter-education to all those things in our culture which tell us our worthiness comes from our looks, our homes, our jobs, our incomes, our possessions. You get the idea. Counter-education teaches us new ways to celebrate our inherent worthiness, but it can't stop there. Parker asserts that our communal life must also train our members to use their imagination, compassion, creativity, intelligence, conscience, and senses to unmask that which harms life, to resist those forces by cultivating the rituals and spirits that disrupt demonic powers so as to liberate ourselves and others from harmful ways of life. At this point in the sermon, Reverend Haley begins to underscore that the sort of resistance we're after focuses on things or forces rather than on people. I don't think that's an easy concept for her. I know it's not an easy one for me, given some of the people you could think of if you took a little time. But it's an important concept that the type of resistance we're after focuses on things or forces rather than people. She continues, people are usually the movers and enablers of those forces we need to resist. But our theology reminds us to resist drawing lines of what we are for versus what we are against at people. Our theology reminds us to refuse the urge to put some people on the good guys' side and others on the bad. Instead, we are to recognize, and this is the part that gave me some enlightenment, we are to recognize that every one of us at any given moment contains the potential to further the cause of those things that may bring indignity, injustice, destruction, or death. I drove my car to church this morning, a car that requires fossil fuels. I drank a cup of coffee from a plastic cup, and I live in a house that most people in the world would consider appropriate for 3 or even 4 times the number of people in my family. It has central air, which I use. I could go on, Reverend Haley says. Any of us could, I imagine. Go on identifying those ways where we intentionally or unintentionally further the causes of injustice or indignity to life or our planet. But resisting me or any of us as a person, insisting on that kind of ideological purity in order to imagine transformation, is not the helpful path. Instead, as William Urey's great book on conflict transformation, Getting to Yes, has said, focus on the problem, not the people. We need to focus on resisting the systems, structures, habits, policies, and practices that bring death or indignity to any member of the family or to creation itself, rather than focus our resistance on the people. And here's something Reverend Haley said in her original sermon, and I think it might apply this year as well. She says, although I confess I am finding this differentiation especially difficult in this year's presidential race. Maybe you know what I mean. More intimately, this difficult discernment also plays itself out in our neighborhoods, workplaces, holiday dinner tables, and even our gyms. The other day, my daughter came home from our new gym telling a story of homophobic bullying by one of her peers. It was hard to figure out how to help her stop this bullying without demonizing the kid who did the bullying. But that is the task. Our overarching commitment is to humanize rather than demonize, to remember that forces of injustice and evil threaten all of us equally, even if we are the ones who seem to be enabling those forces of injustice and evil at any minute. And also to remember my favorite piece of wisdom from Richard Rohr, pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Parker is right to highlight the risk of saying no. No is much riskier than yes. Yes feels friendlier, more open, less potentially offensive. No highlights our intent to disrupt the status quo, upset what is currently in the way of our yes, undo those things that might seem comfortable, traditional, or right. Easier to say that we are for peace than to name what we see as the enemy of peace and to actively work to resist and change those things. Most of us, especially those of us raised as women, are culturally encouraged to say yes and discouraged from a no. However, without the no, a yes doesn't actually mean much. It's a yes without limits or boundaries. Anything might be imagined as possible in a yes that lacks a complementary no. And if anything is possible by your yes, then what does your yes really mean? The inverse applies, of course. A no without a complementary yes shuts off growth, relationship, creativity, and vision. Natural resistance to change means no may actually be our default. This has been a challenge for us as a religious movement, to move from our no and get clear instead on our yes. Most of us arrive knowing the religion we don't want, what things or ideas we don't believe in, all the stuff we left behind, all the stuff we seek refuge from, whatever we rejected and were injured by. There is no shortage of religious injury. However, if we are clear about our no, our work must then become articulating the positive vision and positive theology at the heart of our community and our faith. Though it can be temporarily energizing to be against a common enemy, if we are to be a living tradition, we must be creators rather than simply detractors, builders of new ways rather than only tearing down the old. In a similar way, we can too often ground our work for justice in what we are against fracking, against racism, against poverty. Rebecca Parker reminds us that resisting these or other forces must be grounded in more than the outrage or grief if they are to be sustainable and sustaining. Instead, she encourages our resistance to be grounded in a deep affirmation of life's goodness, in celebration of life's beauty, and in receptivity to grace. Holding this positive vision as our foundation sustains our activism through refreshing experiences of beauty and joy. As individuals and as a congregation, let us remember to articulate not only what we are for, our great positive visions of joy, celebration, compassion, kindness, and love, but also to claim clearly what we are against, to consider our lives and this congregation as a protest, a living, breathing act of resistance to all of those things which stand in the way of our vision, those forces in our own hearts which would cause us to stumble, those habits in our own lives which keep us from being who we are meant to be, those forces in the world which work against the beloved community. Let us imagine not just that our lives will do no harm, that our community will be a place of sanctuary, but also that we will be active agents in undoing the harm that has already been done. So that as we invite someone into membership in our church, and as we each feel moved by this faith, we might imagine we are being recruited into a great countercultural resistance of love, a joyful effort that seeks in small and big ways to offer our lives as a protest against all that is destructive and evil. As witness to and keepers of the great story of connection, goodness, beauty, equality, and love, so that we might say to each person as they arrive among us, welcome to this beloved community, this beloved community of resistance. Thank you.
Now please rise in body or spirit to sing hymn 318, We Would Be One. Our song leaders will lead us in this hymn. Then please remain standing for the closing words. Ron Furster will return to extinguish the chalice, which I promise will be easier to extinguish than it was to light, as I say the closing words adapted from the words of Craig Crippen. Oh, what we find when we stop searching. Ah, what we find when we stop forcing. Oh, what we find when we stop fearing. Oh, what we find when we just love. May it be so. Go now into the world and live in your yes and your no.